Ukraine Liaison Office, which will start its operations on 1 June, initially out of Paris and in Kiev as soon as possible. Our commitment is to support Ukraine with its planning and its defined policy priorities. And before handing over to the speakers, let me mention just a few potential areas of involvement based on our discussions with the government of Ukraine so far. First, Ukraine will need huge investment in infrastructure, and this will need to be financed and managed by targeted and coordinated funds, not only for physical, but also for data infrastructure. And we can support work in particular on good governance and quality infrastructure. Second, in relation to work on macro stabilization and economic recovery policies, we can provide the OECD expertise in terms of economic trade and investment analysis and advice, including via a structured review at the appropriate time. Third, we can provide best practice policy advice about urban planning and development as Ukraine's damaged cities and built environment are rebuilt. Fourth, we are ready to provide advice to help address long-standing issues with the business environment, including when it comes to competition policies and support for small and medium-sized enterprises, entrepreneurship, reform of state-owned enterprises, and energy sector reform. Fifth, we believe we can help with strengthening Ukraine's public institutions through continued support for anti-corruption institutions and reforms, and to support transparency and integrity of aid flows. And last but not least, our expertise in migration policy allows us to support policies for the return of refugees and internally displaced people, which will be important as Ukraine designs and implements its reconstruction priorities. But let me now turn over to our experts. We look forward to the further insights and suggestions out of today's discussions. And indeed, we will continue to engage with the government of Ukraine, the European Union, other international organizations, as the OECD Council considers how we can best contribute to this important overall effort. Let me finish where I started. The people of Ukraine and their leaders have truly inspired us with their courage. But they have many difficult days, weeks, and months behind them, and it is sadly likely that they have many more difficult days and weeks, perhaps months, in front of them. But let us hope that the opportunity to start the rebuilding and reconstruction effort comes sooner rather than later, and I very much look forward to this very important discussion today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. Thank you, Matthias. Turning now to His Excellency Ambassador Vadim Omelchenko, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Ukraine to France. I understand that the ambassador will be speaking French, so I will remind you of the translation function, which is below to the left, to the right on your screen. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Вони подумали, що французьку добили. Шановний пане генеральний секретар. Dear Mr. Secretary General. Шановні колеги посли. Dear colleagues, the ambassadors. Шановне зібрання, шановні присутні. Dear friends, dear people who are present. Перш за все, хотів би подякувати за нагоду взяти участь в сьогоднішньому заході. First of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to take part in today's event. Я сприймаю це як потужний сигнал і знак солідарності і підтримки героїчного народу України. To me, it is a strong message of support and solidarity for the courageous people of Ukraine. Ви знаєте, що наш народ – це народ, який іде до майбутнього, спрямований в майбутнє. You know that our people is the people that is oriented towards the future. І тому питання відновлення України. And therefore the issue of restoration of Ukraine. Це дуже актуальна тема It's a very topical issue,
яку вже необхідно починати обговорювати на кращих інтелектуальних майданчиках світу.
that needs to start being discussing on the best intellectual sites and platforms of the world.
Одним з провідних таких майданчиків, звісно, є організація ОЕСР.
Obviously, one of the leading platforms for that is OECD.
Дозвольте також висловити вам особисто, пане генеральний секретарю, нашу щиру подяку за ті кроки, які ви здійснили у відповідь на невиправдану агресію з боку Російської Федерації проти України.
Let me also thank you, dear Mr. Secretary General, and the organization for the steps that you have made in response to the unjustified aggression of Russia against Ukraine.
Рішення про відкриття офісу в Україні, яке було прийнято в розпал військових дій,
The decision on opening an office of OECD in Ukraine that was made in the midst of the military actions
свідчить про віру в нашу перемогу.
It is an evidence of your belief in our victory.
А також впевненість у процвітаючому, незалежному і демократичному майбутньому України.
And about it is also the evidence of your confidence about a flourishing, independent and democratic future of Ukraine.
Я сподіваюся, що міністр Милованов надасть вам більше інформації з економічних питань.
I hope that Minister Milovanov will share more information with you on the economic issues.
Тому я хотів би зосередитись на деяких політичних аспектах.
And therefore, I would like to focus more maybe on some political aspects.
Сьогодні світ переживає найбільшу безпекову кризу з часів Другої світової війни.
Today, the world is experiencing the biggest security crisis since the Second World War.
Ви знаєте, що 24 лютого Росія розпочала повномасштабне військове вторгнення на територію суверенної держави України.
You know that on the 24th of February, Russia started the full-scale aggression on the Ukrainian territory.
Наслідки цієї атаки катастрофічні.
The consequences of that invasion are really dramatic.
Це війна гібрид,
It is about a hybrid war.
яка відбувається не тільки і не стільки на полі бою,
It actually that is a war that is happening not that much on the field of battle.
Ця війна також має інформаційний аспект.
This war has also an information dimension,
Гуманітарний аспект,
a humanitarian dimension,
і також це економічна війна.
and obviously it is about an economic war.
Ви знаєте, що росіяни не можуть, і це вже ясно всім, що вони не можуть перемогти на полі бою.
You know that Russians are not capable, and now it is clear to everybody that they are not capable to win on the battlefield.
І тому вони боязливо переходять до тактики, яку вони використовували в Чечні, Сирії.
And this is why they are cowardly passing to a tactic that they had applied in Chechnya and in Syria.
Тобто вони свідомо обстрілюють балістичними ракетами великі і малі міста України.
I mean, they deliberately shell with ballistic missiles the small and big cities of Ukraine.
Руйнування інфраструктури спричиняє гуманітарну кризу.
The ruined infrastructures cause a humanitarian crisis.
На жаль, 12 мільйонів людей в Україні залишили свої домівки.
Unfortunately, 12 million of people in Ukraine have left their homes.
З них 6 мільйонів перебувають на території Європейського Союзу.
Out of these, 6 million people are now in the European Union.
Решта залишається на території України.
And the rest are remaining on the territory of Ukraine.
Уявіть собі, люди, які вчора ще мирно жили,
Imagine people that have been living peacefully until yesterday.
зараз змушені все залишити і, рятуючи своїх дітей, шукати собі притулок.
And now they have to leave everything, and in order to save their children, they have to seek a better place.
В великих містах і в маленьких містах руйнується повністю інфраструктура. Тобто домівки, дитячі садочки, лікарні, школи.
In towns and cities, the infrastructures are destroyed. I mean, the homes, the kindergarten, schools, hospitals, whatever.
Вони свідомо виводять з ладу станції теплопостачання, енергопостачання.
They are deliberately destroying these stations that are providing heating and water supply.
Я думаю, що ви за всім цим слідкуєте.
I think that you follow all of that.
У мене є добра новина.
But I have a good news for you and for us.
Хочу вам дати таке свідоцтво маленьке.
I just want to share a small witnessing with you.
Знаєте, що президент Зеленський залишається з самого початку війни в столиці в Україні, Києві.
You know that President Zelensky has been remaining in the capital in Kyiv since the very beginning of the war.
І я хочу вам сказати, що в нашій державі працює вся структура влади.
And I want to tell you that the entire structure of power and all the authorities are functioning in Ukraine.
Колись ми будемо ділитися цим досвідом керування державою під час війни.
One day we will start sharing our experiences about how to operate in a situation of war.
Звертаю вашу увагу, що не на день не припинялася робота державних органів.
I just draw your attention to the fact that the operation of the state authorities hasn't been suspended for a single day.
В тому числі фінансового сектору,
including the financial sector,
Національного банку,
the National Bank,
і всіх міністерств.
and all the ministries.
Як це робиться, колись я вам повідомлю.
Once I will be able to share the knowledge of how to do that.
Це не є тому, що ми до війни були одним з чемпіонів в цифрових технологіях.
Actually, that's not a big secret. This is because even before the war, we were among the champions for the digital innovation.
Так от, дипломатія так само працює.
So this means that diplomacy is operating too.
І президент регулярно проводить онлайн наради послів всього світу.
And the president is organizing regularly the meetings with the ambassadors throughout the world.
Одночасно в них бере участь понад 100 послів.
About 100 ambassadors take part in those meetings simultaneously.
Наради проводяться переважно вночі, так щоб ми могли тримати зв'язок з країнами, у яких
those sessions usually take place in the night, so that we can get connected to all the parts of the world at the same time, and that the embassies on the other side of the world of the globe are also connected and operational.
Так от, ще 2 тижні тому наради з президентом, вони були присвячені в основному постачанню зброї.
And I want to tell you that even about 2 weeks ago, the sessions of discussions with the president were focused mainly on the supplies of weapons.
Але останні 2 наради президент присвятив відновленню країни.
But actually, the 2 recent sessions were focused by the president on the future.
Про що це свідчить?
What does it mean?
По-перше, про те, що ми віримо в нашу перемогу.
First of all, it means that we believe in our victory.
І маємо для цього серйозні підстави.
And we have reasons to think so.
По-друге,
Secondly,
вже зараз думки президента і керівництва держави спрямовані на майбутнє.
it is now already that the thoughts of the president and of the government are directed into the future.
На відновлення країни.
It is about the restoration and rebuilding of the country.
Уявіть собі, який буде цікавий і потужний ринок відновлення країни.
You can imagine how big and interesting will be the market of restoration.
Більш того, скажу, що ви знаєте, що Росія атакувала нас з 8 напрямків.
More than that, I would tell you that you know that Russia attacked us from 8 directions.
Зараз вони залишилися на 2.
Now they are active on 2 directions.
То 6 напрямків ми звільнили.
Which means we have liberated 6
І
directions.
на звільнених територіях дуже швидко починаються роботи з відновлення.
And on the liberated territories, there are really immediate works for restoration, for rebuilding the things.
І от президент в цьому контексті запропонував ідею патронату.
And in that context, the president has suggested a new idea, which is the idea of patronage.
Яким передбачено, що країни, регіони, міста, організації
Which provides that countries, regions, cities, towns, organizations,
які можуть взяти патронат відповідно над великими, малими містами, регіонами України,
that are capable or able or willing to assume patronage for regions, towns, cities, agglomerations of Ukraine.
міста або галузі,
It might be also, cities or industries,
освіту,
fields
медицину,
like education or healthcare,
транспорт, водопостачання.
transport, water supply.
Я сподіваюся, що найближчим часом ми зможемо зробити презентацію цього проекту, в тому числі для вашого.
So everybody is invited, and I hope that soon we will be able to make a presentation of that project and to offer it to your attention.
Декілька країн вже долучилися до цього проекту.
There are some countries that have already joined that project.
Завтра я буду брати участь в нараді в регіоні Іль-де-Франс.
Tomorrow I will take part in a session of the Regional Council of Ile-de-France.
І сподіваюся, що там буде прийнято рішення про те, що регіон візьме патронат над Чернігівською і Київською областями.
And I hope that a decision will be made during that session for the region to assume patronage over the regions of Chernihiv and Kyiv in Ukraine.
Звісно, що всі, хто долучиться до цього проекту, отримають і фінансування, і пільги.
Obviously, everyone who will be involved in that project will get new possibilities for funding and for privileges.
Тож щиро запрошую всіх вас і організацію долучитися в свій спосіб до цього проекту.
And I sincerely invite you, all of you, to join in any form or in any approach to this initiative and to be with us.
Хотів би звернути вашу увагу на те, що, ви знаєте, Україна прагне в червні отримати статус кандидата до членів Європейського Союзу.
Also, I would like to draw your attention to another thing. As you know, Ukraine is seeking the membership, and in June we are waiting for the decision on the candidacy.
Дуже багато думок і спекуляцій на цю тему.
There is much debate and speculation about that.
Я хотів би внести трошки ясність двома словами.
I would like to bring some clarity about that by saying just a few words.
Ми розмовляємо тільки про кандидатство зараз.
Now we are speaking only about the candidacy.
І ми кажемо, що це був би дуже потужний жест підтримки для нашої країни, для народу, який зараз виборює свою незалежність і також сражається за цінності цілого світу.
And we say that it would be a really strong gesture, a sign of support and solidarity with Ukraine, with its people that is struggling now for its independence, but also for the values of the entire world.
Україна виконала всі вимоги, які ставляться до країн-кандидатів.
Ukraine has met all the conditions that are set for the candidate countries.
І ми передали в Європейську комісію відповідні документи.
And we have submitted to the European Commission the relevant documents.
Разом з цим ми абсолютно розуміємо, що мова йде не про членство.
At the same time, we are realizing that it is not about the immediate membership.
І ми розуміємо, що Україні треба буде пройти довгий шлях, на якому робити реформи і перетворення країни.
And we realize that Ukraine has yet to make a long way in order to achieve this goal. And obviously, we have to put in place much reforms and many things that are implied in that path.
Ми це усвідомлюємо і ми готові працювати.
We are conscious about that, and we are prepared and willing to
І
work
притримуватися чинних прав.
and to respect all the applicable rules.
І на сам кінець хотів вам повідомити ще одну важливу річ.
And before I conclude, I would like to inform you of another important thing.
3 дні тому я розмовляв з губернатором Одеського району.
3 days ago, I had a talk with the governor of the Odessa region.
Ви знаєте, да, що Одеса – це одне з головних міст України.
You know that Odessa is one of the major cities in Ukraine.
Всесвітньо відома
Obviously, it is globally known
завдяки своїй космополітичності,
for its cosmopolitic nature,
різноманіттю культур.
for its diversity of cultures.
Так от, губернатор повідомив мені, що останній тиждень Одеса під дуже жорсткими бомбардуваннями.
So the chief of the region informed me that for the last week, Odessa has been experiencing huge challenges.
Бомбардують балістичними ракетами.
The city is shelled with ballistic missiles,
Касетними бомбами.
with fragmentation bombs.
І б'ють по цивільній інфраструктурі і по портовій інфраструктурі.
They are hitting and they are targeting the civil infrastructure and the harbor infrastructure.
Про що це свідчить?
What does it mean?
Що Путін, розуміючи, що програє,
It means that Putin, realizing that he is losing,
використовує ще одну загрозу, ще одну зброю.
he is actually now using another weapon and another threat.
Тобто вони свідомо провокують голод у світі.
So they are deliberately provoking a famine in the world.
Тому що через Чорноморські порти, через Одеські порти Україна постачає 40% харчів, продуктів харчування в світ.
Because it is through Odessa harbors that Ukraine is exporting about 40% of the wheat to the entire world.
В першу чергу це країни Африки і Азії.
First of all, it is about the African countries and Middle Asia.
Російський флот блокує наші суда.
It is the Russian fleet that is blocking Ukrainian ship.
Вони не дають зайти в українські порти іноземним судам.
They prevent the foreign boats from entering Ukrainian harbors.
Ще раз хочу сказати, що це загроза світового рівня, яка не менша, ніж ядерна загроза.
Again, this threat of hunger is a global threat that is as important as a nuclear threat.
Але якщо ядерна загроза гіпотетично виглядає, то ця загроза вже працює.
But unlike the nuclear threat that is looking like something hypothetical, this threat is real.
Зараз ми спільно з деякими країнами Європейського Союзу відпрацьовуємо логістичні шляхи перевезення. Тобто Україна підтверджує своє зобов'язання і відпрацьовує логістичні шляхи постачання по суші.
So Ukraine remains committed to its commitments about exports and about the supplies, and we are working with our partners in the EU on the routes, the itineraries for ground supplies of such exports.
Я хочу закликати вас, вашої країни, потужно дбати на цю
And I call
цей виклик.
all of you, all of your countries to give a strong response to that.
Тому що це не тільки загроза, і не стільки загроза України, а загроза цілому світу.
Because it is not about only a threat for Ukraine, it is about a threat to the entire globe.
Я вам всім дуже дякую за увагу.
I thank you all for the attention.
Віримо в перемогу України.
We believe in the victory of Ukraine.
І сподіваюся, що Офіс ОЕСР дуже швидко буде працювати в Києві.
And I hope that the OECD office will be very soon operating in Ukraine.
Ще раз дякую.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this powerful and detailed, insightful description. Very, very much appreciated, and thank you very much for sharing and presenting here with us today. Turning now to our expert panels, I will now like to introduce the panelists to you. First, from Berkeley in California, from the University of California in Berkeley, Yuri Gorodnichenko. I practiced. I hope I didn't butcher that name. I'm sorry, but we spoke earlier and I'm allowed to call him Yuri from now on. He's a Quantits Presidential Professor at the Department of Economics at the University of Berkeley, University of California in Berkeley. He is a native of Ukraine, received his MA in Ukraine and PhD in Michigan. Next, I would like to introduce Natalia Shapoval. She is the chair of the Kiev School of Economics Institute and vice president for policy research and director at the Center of Excellence in Procurement. She has served as a contributor to the Ukraine Reform Monitoring Project of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, among other important issues. And since the beginning of the war, Natalia has worked with the government of Ukraine to calculate the cost of damages to the Ukrainian state. And she is logging in from Kiev. Welcome, Natalia. Next, we have Timothy Brick. He's the head of the sociological research at the Kiev School of Economics. And he is the recipient of the 2018 Best Young Sociologist of Ukraine Award, has a PhD in social sciences and a master's degree in sociology and social research. He was a visiting researcher at Stanford and NYU, so he has been around, but since the beginning of the war, he serves as an acting wartime vice president of international affairs at the Kiev School of Economics. And as Natalia, he is based in Kiev. Torbjörn Becker is joining us from Stockholm. He's the director of the Stockholm Institute of Transition Economics at the Stockholm School of Economics and has been there since 2006. He's also a board member of the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, chairman of the board of the Kiev Economics Institute and the CENEA in Poland, and a member of the International Faculty Committee at the International School of Economics in Tbilisi. So we have here a wealth of experience and insights, And also, and I don't know if he has connected, we are hoping to have an intervention as well from Timothy Milovanov, who is the president of Kiev School of Economics and former Minister of Economy of Ukraine. And he will be joining when he has the moment. So we hope that he will be able to join. And last but not least, our colleague from the OECD, from the GRC Directorate, it's called now, Global Relations Cooperation, Bill Thompson. He's the head of the Eurasia desk at the OECD GRC Directorate. So now, without further ado, I would like to ask Yuri to start by setting the scene for us. I have two questions for you as our first speaker to give us the background. The first question is, how was the Ukrainian economy doing on the eve of the war, and where was it heading? And secondly, what scenarios should Ukraine and its partners prepare for, not only militarily, but also economically? And if I can ask you to do this in 10 minutes, I would be absolutely grateful. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Raga. Thank you very much for having me at this wonderful event, very important event. I think to understand where the economy is going or will be going in the future, we need to understand the trajectory Ukraine had since it gained its independence in 1991. We know it was a very volatile economic history. There was a massive collapse of output in the early 1990s, then hyperinflation, the rise of oligarchs. Then we had economic recovery, but this recovery was punctuated by crisis. For example, you look at the Great Recession, it was a big financial panic in Ukraine. It weighed down on economic growth in Ukraine for many, many years. Then we had the annexation of Crimea and parts of the Donbass in 2014. That was another major negative shock. But many good changes happened after the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, and Ukraine resumed its growth. The country did many institutional changes, such as improved democratic processes, independent central bank. Maybe for the first time since its independence, Ukraine got serious about fighting corruption. For example, government introduced a transparent system called Prozor to do public procurement. It was highly, highly successful. Ukraine signed a key trade agreement with the European Union, and as a result, Ukraine was increasingly integrated with the EU, and some trends were really stunning. For many years, for example, Russia was a major trading partner for Ukraine. Now it's the European Union. Also, over the last 10 or so years, Ukraine began to send a wider range of goods to the world, especially agricultural products such as wheat and sunflower oil. And as Ambassador mentioned earlier today, this is one of the key exports for Ukraine, and there is a lot of dependence on Ukrainian wheat and other agricultural output. Another key growth industry in Ukraine has been information technology, which makes roughly a quarter of export revenues. If you look at the data in 2020, in fact, IT services was Ukraine's top export to the United States in 2021. So we have a lot of diversity, a lot of progress there. We also see that Ukraine increased integration with the global economy means that many goods play a critical role in some markets. For example, Ukraine was expected to make roughly 12% of global wheat exports in 2022. Many countries, including Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, and many others, depend heavily on Ukraine for their wheat. And so there are concerns about famine as a result of Russia's blockade of ships leaving Ukraine. So this is a very serious issue, and it's going to be getting worse if farmers are unable to ship their output or plant their seeds as the war is raging. Some interconnections are even more striking and surprising. For example, Ukraine plays a critical role in production of neon. It's an inert glass that is a key component for lasers used in making microchips. Ukraine produces, for example, 90% of semiconductor-grade neon used in the United States. In any case, it's clear that the war in Ukraine, before the war, Ukraine was gradually becoming a part of the global economy, very tightly integrated. Then we obviously had COVID, and it was a negative shock for many, many countries, including Ukraine. One may have thought that the Ukrainian economy is going to emerge from this crisis as crippled as it was after the Great Recession. But in fact, Ukraine did relatively well, and it was a combination of luck and preparedness. Let me start with the luck. The demand for food products remained strong during the COVID crisis, while energy prices fell. This improved the current account for Ukraine, and the hryvnia stayed relatively stable. There was no run on the currency. There was no banking panic. The country was doing relatively well. Now, for the preparedness, we'll remember that the Great Recession was devastating for the financial sector in the advanced economies. Ukraine had a similar shock then, and also in 2014, when many banks were exposed to losses of their assets in Crimea and Donbass. But after this very difficult, very tough lessons, the National Bank of Ukraine invested very heavily in cleaning the banking system, making the financial system much more resilient. As a result, banks entered the COVID crisis and later the war with strong reserves and profits. So the financial system was in great shape, and this is what is helping Ukraine to survive the war now. Now, just before the war, Ukraine was expected to grow at a relatively modest 3-4% per year. This is a strong growth for a developed economy, but this is not what one should expect for an economy with Ukraine's level of development. Could Ukraine grow faster? Yes, of course, but circumstances were somewhat complicated. On the one hand, you have very strong expansionary fiscal policy. For example, President Zelensky emphasized building highways, and we know infrastructure is important for economic development. On the other hand, we know anti-corruption efforts were not particularly convincing at the time, and it was getting harder to attract FDI. In addition, the central bank was raising interest rates to fight inflation. So the economy before the war was in a reasonably good, okay position, but it was not amazing. In any case, I remain an optimist about Ukraine's growth potential. Very briefly, Ukraine is very close to the European Union, which is a huge market. Geography is a very strong predictor, determinant of trade. And so Ukraine is in a unique position to grow very fast because of just being close to Europe. Second, Ukraine has highly educated workforce, which firms can hire at bargain prices. Third, Ukraine can build on its current strengths in information technology, in agriculture, metals, aerospace, and other industries. So the fundamentals are there. And Ukraine, frankly, has made a lot of progress transforming itself from an unbalanced Soviet economy into a diversified, market-based, modern economy. Now, obviously, the Russian invasion makes any growth outlook highly uncertain. This is to answer your second question, Raga. We have relatively good scenarios. For example, Ukraine defeats the aggression soon and has strong security guarantees so that another invasion is unlikely to happen anytime soon. Then Ukraine will have a very strong V-shaped recovery, and it will be a desirable location for investment. So Ukraine will be a boom country. Think about West Germany after World War II, for example. But we also have very bad scenarios. For example, the war drags on for many years, the security issues are not resolved. In this case, Ukraine is not going to be a good place to do business. There will be a lot of risk, and so it will be hard to rely on private economy to do anything significant. Iraq and Afghanistan will be recent examples of what can happen if security issues are not resolved. In summary, it's still unknown how many Ukrainian civilians are killed by Russia. It must be in tens of thousands of people, maybe much more. We don't know. There is also no knowing when the destruction will end. Natalia will speak later today on the size of the destruction, but it's clear that this is huge. What we see in Ukraine is tragic. It's beyond tragic, but we should also understand that another victim of the Russian invasion may be the Ukrainian economy, and it will need a lot of help to recover. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Yuri. You did indeed do as I was hoping for. You set the scene perfectly for the discussion to ensue. Thank you very much. And moving then to Natalia, who has been doing the calculations as I mentioned, and if I could ask you, since the first day of the war, really, your team has been working every day on calculating the damage in terms of destroyed infrastructure, and that is social facilities, including hospitals and schools and housing, and as well as the cost to business and to the environment. Can you tell us and explain how you're carrying out this work, and maybe share your findings with us, if you will, and based on your work, are you in any position now to estimate the reconstruction needs? Natalia, I know I'm giving you a lot of questions and only 10, 11 minutes. So the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, our team has been working with the government on estimation of the damages and losses to the economy since the very beginning of war. And as of now, the estimates are around $98 billion of direct damage to physical infrastructure, and between $500 and $600 billion general economic losses. So the first figure is easier in a sense. So we do these estimates taking into account several sources. Firstly, we collect all the evidences of damage from the media, from social media, cross-verify this data, and describe every case in our database. Secondly, we cooperate with the ministries, where they also have some case-by-case description of damages. And we take this information and estimate it. With some infrastructure, we have to evaluate every case, like with Crimea airplane, you know, or with some very unique cultural buildings. But with roads or with housing, we take some average price. Why the second figure between 500 and 600 billion of losses, as I say, and Ukraine used several methods to make such an estimate. At some point, the government used estimate of around $1 trillion. And in fact, there are multiple methods how to make this estimate. Like if we take difference between the projected economic growth without the war and we observe what is now, of course, this loss will be huge, maybe even more than trillions. But from the practical perspective, we now operate with a figure like 500, 600, because it kind of matches our estimates from different angles. Why we do it? Firstly, because we want our government and everyone in Ukraine to have this figure that shows how huge is the damage. And second, to enforce everyone to think about recovery already now. This is very important because for Ukrainian economy to strive, it's critical to preserve functioning business, because the more businesses, the more small and micro businesses we have, the less we would need support, you know, during the war and after the war. Secondly, some recovery, some reconstruction is critical for day-to-day operation. There are roads, more than 23,000 kilometers of roads that are damaged. There are more than almost 40 million square meters of housing that are destroyed. There are 12 airports, railway infrastructure, and all of that cannot wait. So that's another reason to think about it already now. At the same time, as the ambassador mentioned at the very beginning, there is a huge refugee crisis, and whatever you take, either number of people who left, or number of people internally displaced, or this 40 million square meters of housing destroyed, we understand that such a huge volume of housing would take years to build. So it would be, in good years, Ukraine was able to construct around 3 million square meters a year and commission like around 10 millions. And you can imagine that in order to rebuild 40 million, it would take years. Of course, there are ways to find, more easy, simple, quicker solutions, but still it takes a lot of time. And then, as the Minister of Finance of Ukraine widely communicates the figure of $5 billion of monthly support that is needed for Ukrainian budget, it's really something critical to decide already now. In a nutshell, there is a very long way to go, both with the damages estimates, because the situation is evolving over all the time, and we expect that the war will take months and maybe even years. So even if Russia will get weaker, it still will continue, and damages will grow. So that should be done. Needs assessment more carefully should be done. And then, of course, funding sources for that should be decided. My personal view is that these sources of funding and rules of funding of even this operational budgetary support right now during the war should be coupled and bundled with EU membership, because these procedures and rules are known. The goal why Ukrainian government would use these procedures is also very clear. So I think these two processes should go hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia. It's staggering to hear those numbers. These are outrageous numbers. Thank you very much for just going over this with us. And we are now moving to Timothy Breck. Your title, Mr. Breck, says it all. Acting Wartime Vice President of International Affairs and the Head of Sociological Research, Kiev School of Economics. Acting wartime. That is something that you would probably not have hoped to have, a title that you would never hope to have. The war is, of course, shocking to all of us, but of course, we all perceive it differently depending on our standpoint, the media we watch and the blogs we read. From your view inside Ukraine, you are right there. What is your vision of this war? If you can describe it to us, and the social cohesion inside the country, how is it affected by this common threat? And how do you think the Ukrainian society will change as the result of the war? What is your view on this?
Thank you for your introduction. You're absolutely right. The title says it all. And thank you for this opportunity to talk to your audience. Indeed, I have stayed in Kiev during this terrible invasion, which has taken so many lives. So I can comment both as a scholar, as a sociologist, but also as a witness of these events. Of course, it has profoundly changed Ukrainian society, its demographic and social structure already. According to different estimation, we have about more than 6 million of refugees and more than 7 million of displaced Ukrainians internally. And, we still don't have high quality data on human capital losses. So Natalia presented you some data on losses in capital, infrastructure, but we don't really know exactly how many, human capital we lost in terms of education, and how many ideas could have been developed and how many businesses could have succeeded if this war did not happen. So we still need to take all this into consideration. So I guess quite a lot of people are, when thinking about Ukraine, are surprised by the level of Ukrainian resilience. And a lot of policymakers and scholars around the world, they ask questions. Where does it come from? Why Ukraine has been so strong, and what should be done to rebuild Ukraine using the momentum of this resilience? And I agree, we should understand factors that caused it. We must understand them for better policy making. And my message today is that, of course, there are many nuances and many factors that have contributed to the Ukrainian resilience, but I would argue that local governance and decentralization is one of the key components. You ask questions about social cohesion, and Ukrainian civil society and local communities, they're very strong and united. We have a lot of volunteers, local territorial defense volunteers and civil volunteers who supported army and medics and wounded. They all are human beings. They all are individuals who are saving Ukraine right now. And this strong civil society, it did not emerge overnight exponentially. It was a long incremental process which started after the Orange Revolution in 2004. Then it accelerated after the Euromaidan Revolution in 2014. So the strength of civil society has been gradually building up for the past 8 years. Going back to the reform of decentralization and necessity of local governance, I have to stress that for many years, Ukraine used to be a very centralized government when local people did not have much power to say or to influence policies and spending at the local level. But after 2015, things changed with a new significant reform of decentralization. It provided new administrative structure with local communities to have more political powers, to have more agency and incentives to develop local business and to allocate local budgets and spend on well-being more efficiently. And today, we see that quite a lot of local Ukrainians are ready to defend their territories, their local communities, and even under occupation, so many Ukrainians, they rally and they are ready to defend their leadership. They defend their mayors when these mayors are abducted or when Russian soldiers try to abduct these mayors. So at the same time, we observe that there are other local communities that are located in safer geographical locations in center or western Ukraine, and they're quite efficient and willing to welcome displaced people and to support volunteers with logistics, warehouses, gasoline, medical support, whatever. So I think that it's important to address that in media or in kind of public debates, Ukraine is still often portrayed as a divided nation. There is this almost stereotypical images of Ukraine, which is divided between Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine, Ukrainian speakers and Russian speakers. And this is simply not true. This is a very popular and simple image, but any sociologist will tell you that this is a false narrative. Hundreds of papers, books, data sources published in peer-reviewed journals, they show that in terms of values, culture, identities, Ukraine has been a unified society. And this unification is seen right now. I think there is no doubt in the world that Ukraine is not unified. So the question is, what's going to change with this war? And I think that obviously, we are at the big risk of seeing new social and economic inequalities. So we need strong international support to address these inequalities. to build shelters to those who need them, to help with jobs and social relief to those who need them. But also it is very important to support those institutions which are the backbone of agencies and incentives of Ukrainian population. So I think it is important to keep supporting local governance and those aspects of democracy at the local level, which allow people to prosper and to take their lives in their hand. So I guess this is my main message, that the local governance and decentralization has increased the resilience of Ukrainian communities, and it should be supported and protected. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It is somehow, I don't know how to put this. It is somehow different to hear such an analysis from someone who is right there. So thank you very much for sharing it. And I know I speak for more than myself when I say that from where we are standing and watching the resilience and the courage and the fighting spirit of the Ukrainian people has been outstanding and admirable in any level. So thank you very much, Timothy. Moving now, we were focusing very narrowly on the ground in Ukraine, but Torbjörn, now we're maybe zooming out a bit again, going back to sort of the international multilateral system with Yuri Gorotchenko. I'm doing badly here, sorry. The two of you wrote a paper entitled "A Blueprint for the Reconstruction of Ukraine," and building on that, in your view, how can international aid and cooperation best serve the reconstruction efforts? And if you could draw parallels, if possible, what parallels could we draw with the Marshall Plan after the Second World War? And also, given the number of donors and agencies that are expected to participate in the reconstruction, what would you recommend in terms of institutional design to coordinate and channel aid to Ukraine in order for it to be most successful and quick and productive and all of those things that it needs to be? Torbjörn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Raga, and thank you everyone organizing this event. And of course, I'm very proud to have been part of building up the Kyiv School of Economics, and I'm extremely proud to see how well they are performing also under these very severe conditions. I also want to give full credit to Yuri, who was really the lead author of the blueprint report, and I was just sort of tagging along and adding a few sentences here and there. Maybe I should just add one thing in sort of my background, that I did spend almost 9 years at the IMF in Washington before coming back and being the director of site in Stockholm. So I have a little bit of experience with international organizations. So when I comment on this, believe me that I've spent a few of my years also understanding how they work. But if we start with a little bit where Natalia left off, the amounts that we're discussing when we're thinking about reconstruction of Ukraine are enormous. We should remember that the Ukrainian economy before the war was less than $200 billion US. So, when we're now talking about reconstruction just of infrastructure that's in the amount of 100 billion, and then maybe total damages being in the order of 500 or 600 billion US. These are enormous amounts when you put it into the Ukrainian sort of context and the size of the economy. So the important first thing to note when we talk about how we support Ukraine is that most of the funds that we have to send to Ukraine and help with the reconstruction will have to come in the form of grants and not in terms of loans. Loans will immediately at this level lead to a debt crisis, as soon as we have left Ukraine with the reconstruction efforts, they will face a debt crisis. So we can seriously not think in terms of having loans coming from the IMF, World Bank, EBRD, etc. We have to really think about where is the serious grant money going to come from, because this is what we will need here. And this is then related to how the Marshall Plan was also financed. Absolute majority of the money coming through the Marshall Plan, I think 90% or so, was in the form of grants and not loans. And this is something we have to now think about when we design our help for Ukraine here. Some other key things I think is that, of course, we have to focus on the process where the people of Ukraine and their democratically elected government and president sets up the goals for how they want to rebuild their country and their own future. And when we think about then conditionality from the donor's perspective, we should think about conditionality that supports the government and the people of Ukraine to achieve those goals. We should not come up with our own goals or conditionality that's not consistent with the good plan that Ukraine itself is sort of owning in that process. So I think that's key. At the same time, as we also have been talking about, we cannot be naive to the fact that in the past, there was a lot of issues with corruption in Ukraine. A lot of questions always comes up now in discussions when we talk about reconstruction of Ukraine. But I think we should acknowledge the big progress that has been made in terms of the procurement system, for example, that Natalia and others at the Kyiv School have been involved in developing together with the government. There has been an increased focus on transparency and accountability in those systems. And also in the COVID pandemic, there were some novel sort of methods of procurement introduced in the Prosoro system that made it easier to deal with an emergency situation. And I think this will come in handy when we think about the procurement issues that will come up in the reconstruction process now as well. One other thing then, to connect back to what I said about having been at the IMF, I think it's very important that the institutions like the OECD, IMF, World Bank, etc., is there for Ukraine to partner up with all of the knowledge that is in these institutions, all the technical assistance that you can provide and other IFIs can provide. It's going to, of course, be critical in designing a lot of the institutions and understanding how you rebuild cities and infrastructure. And I saw one of the questions here in the chat was, is Ukraine now going to rebuild greener? And that's certainly something we argue for in the blueprint. Of course, you don't want to rebuild the Soviet infrastructure. You would plan it to be energy efficient. You would plan it based on renewable energy, etc., etc. So this is certainly areas that I think your expertise will be crucially important for a successful reconstruction process in Ukraine. Having said that, though, I think it's quite obvious for many of us that the donor efforts need to be coordinated, probably in a central organization similar to what was the case in the Marshall Plan, where you set up a specific institution that coordinates all of the donors from all over the world, including the international organizations, but also bilateral donors, etc. And we argue in the report that this should be linked to the EU. It should be a separate EU-based institution, because ultimately we think that the future of Ukraine is very closely linked to the future of EU integration and accession for Ukraine. So that reform process really is a key component in making this transition into sort of the future Ukraine really important. And we think that that process will also help with transparency, accountability, and all of these other things that would mitigate concerns about sort of misuse of funds and not making sure that all of Ukraine prospers from this reconstruction effort. So I think we have to sort of acknowledge the fact that for the long-term growth strategy, this reform process really has to be in line with the EU accession plans. And unfortunately, this is not sort of what the IMF or the World Bank, etc., offers. They offer sort of the short run, sort of taking care of the emergency part of it, but sort of really to guide the long-term reform structure for the whole country, I think EU accession must be sort of a very important part of this reconstruction plan. Of course, there are a lot of other things we discuss in the report, but I'm going to stop here so we can actually have a bit of a Q&A and discussion around these issues. So thank you for now.
Thank you very much for these excellent points. And yes, we will. We have a few minutes for questions, and I would encourage people. There are some in the chat already. Like I said in the beginning, the delegations here at the OECD can raise their hands and ask for the floor. But the ones who are watching the live stream, I would ask to post it in the chat. But before you do that, I want to take the next 5 minutes and give the floor to Bill Thompson. The OECD has been mentioned, obviously, several times during this conversation. I'd like to get your comments, both as an expert on the region and as a dedicated GRC member of staff. Over to you, Bill.
Thank you, Raga, and I will try and keep it well under 5 minutes. I'm watching the clock. First, I want to come back to where Timothy Brick was on decentralization. I was very happy to hear it. We have worked with Ukraine consistently for almost a decade on territorial development, regional development, and decentralization. And I'm very proud of that work. And I think what Timothy said is absolutely true about the way it has contributed to Ukraine's resilience. We didn't come to this as a national security issue, but that is one of the many benefits. And I can tell you, when we started this work before Maidan, presenting our findings and recommendations, they were met with hostility by the previous incumbents and taken up with alacrity and real vision by the new authorities after the spring of 2014, and advanced systematically, consistently, and in a very, very impressive way. Having said that, because I want to crow a little bit, we've been there all along, but the credit is still the Ukrainians. They did things that even OECD experts said would be impossible. I want to just make 3 very quick points. First, on donor coordination, I want to agree completely with Torsten Becker about this. We are already talking regularly with the Cabinet of Ministers and the Reform Delivery Office. We want to revise the OECD Ukraine Action Plan. But that revision of the action plan, which is under discussion, must wait on the government's definition of its reconstruction plan. And when it comes to coordination, the OECD certainly is committed to the idea that it has to be Ukrainian-led and Ukrainian-owned at every level. My watchword is nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. The second point, and I think this is consistent because we don't want to impose, but we do have an understanding of the agenda that we share with our Ukrainian colleagues, is that reform and reconstruction must go hand in hand. And we've heard a lot about that, not only anti-corruption, other public governance reforms, business environment reforms. The Secretary General spoke about many areas, and I won't repeat them. But what I will say is that we're very encouraged in our contacts with the government by the degree to which that joining of reform and reconstruction is seen in Kyiv as well. The Prime Minister has even spoken of this as an opportunity for the transformation of the state. And I think that's how we have to come to it. It absolutely is a case of building back better. And my last point, Raga, ladies and gentlemen, is that although the OECD is best known for data and reports, and people think of us as a think tank that publishes books, that is only one of the pillars on which we stand. All of that data and analysis feeds the policy dialogue in OECD committees, working groups, expert groups, OECD bodies on every conceivable area of policy. And one of the priorities for the action plan is to bring Ukraine to be much more a part of that dialogue, not simply a passive recipient of data or advice or recommendations, but a contributing active participant in policy dialogues involving members and partners. And linked to that, to begin, as we've already done quite a bit since the Maidan Revolution of Dignity, also to begin helping Ukraine align to OECD instruments and standards and to use those not only to anchor its reforms and to send signals about its reforms to others, but also to help advance its European aspiration, because I absolutely agree as well that that alignment, which really is congruent with its drawing closer to the OECD, is central. And my stopwatch tells me that's 3.5 minutes, so I'll stop. Thank you.
Excellent timekeeping, I have to say, and excellent takeaways. And I, as the director of the Development Centre, of course, want to use this opportunity to remind us that the Ukraine at some point in 2014 actually applied for membership of the Development Centre. But that didn't materialize then because it went into the sort of the overall OECD action plan on Ukraine at that time. But that has happened, and of course we would welcome to have a discussion on that should that be considered viable in the Ukrainian government. I'm not putting any pressure. I just wanted to put that out there. We have a question from Latvia, the ambassador of Latvia to the OECD, and I know that you are always quick and concise, so I trust that you will be that as well. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Raga, and thank you everybody for very interesting presentations and useful. My question will be short, but I think it's quite wide. Now we have a discussion on a kind of future after the war, which is not clear when this good moment will come. But it is also clear that there is a more immediate needs. I mean, reconstruction needs to start essentially now, at least partially. And my question is, do you see what can be actions, or what actions are to be taken now to start the reconstruction already? If we cannot see that, or we cannot guarantee that war will end soon. So if anybody can say this, thank you.
Thank you very much. That is a very good question, and Natalia has her hand raised, I assume, to volunteer to answer that question.
Yes, thank you. That's very important that you are asking. So I think there are several ways to do that. I will start from the needs, and then how that could be addressed possibly. So the largest needs are, of course, direct budgetary support of around $5 billion a month. And that's basically usual support of the public services, war, and some basic reconstruction, emergency relief. Second, even though Ukraine is in a fantastic macro-financial situation, given the circumstances, it cannot, last forever. Our trade and terms of trade are changing drastically, so it would be wise to expect that changes in the exchange rate could come, and the central bank would need to release more reserves. Although during this war period they released very few, and it's also a very good sign, but it will not last forever. And all the prices are growing, so inflation will be on the way, and this support of the reserves and macro-financial support will be also critical. Then, as I mentioned, it's very important to save businesses that still can work. From micro businesses with 1 or 3 or 2 people working to larger ones, their needs are different. With micro ones, just giving them small grants that they can exist might suffice, but with larger businesses, they need relocation. Even though government is doing relocation of businesses, it's not enough, and it's in fact costly. So practically it looks like this. The business is somewhere in the east, and they have their last $2 million that they had, from their operational activity, and now they decide whether they preserve this money to pay salaries or to relocate and start from the scratch somewhere like thousands of miles away. And if there would be some financial support for this kind of relocation, more businesses would survive. And then there are more in-kind types of support because Ukraine lacks storages. Some of the storages are confiscated, or I don't know what's correct English word, but war needs like food for soldiers. And for these purposes, many like refrigerators and storages are being taken away from business. And then a lot was bombed, and they don't have enough storages on the territory of Ukraine or somewhere closer to the European border so that they still can sell something. And all of that would really, I think, help all these heroic businesses to continue trade and continue, surviving. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We have several questions in the chat, and if I try to group them here together, there are a couple of questions on transparency and good governance. One from Peter Matthews: post-conflict environments are very challenging in terms of corruption, mismanagement, and inefficiency. We will need for a rapid response be balanced with the need of integrity and good governance. And in the same vein, from Francesco Strassari from the University of Sant'Anna and Pisa, looking at the reconstruction, are there any lessons regarding the impact of organized crime and corruption on policymaking or the role of oligarch policies, what we have learned from other Eastern European countries, Bulgaria as mentioned? If we have these two and under the hat of good governance and reconstruction, I'm looking at Torbjörn or Bill even, or any of our experts. Any volunteers?
If I may, just start. As I mentioned very briefly, though, is that I think Ukraine has made progress in terms of sort of more technical solution to deal with procurement. In the Prosoro, they have, this idea of open procurement where you can do things quickly, but then you immediately publish things, so you have transparency and you can go back and verify what was done, etc., etc. So I think there's a lot of these practical things, but I also think we have to acknowledge that there is a change of mindset, that people are now much more aware of the common good of building Ukraine. So I think, there is this combination, but of course, this needs to be combined with good system for transparency and accountability. So that's just my 2 cents on this.
Mm-hmm. Bill, do you want to add something quickly?
Unmuting. If I might add very quickly, I mentioned our conversations with the cabinet of ministers and the RDO. One of the issues we're discussing with them that they're very keen on, and I think rightly keen on, is to work on the absorption capacity. In 2 senses. One is the obvious sense of being able to track and report and reassure donors that money is going where it is supposed to go and being spent as it should be spent. The other, which I think is also very important if we really take Ukrainian ownership and leadership seriously, is ensuring a really whole of government approach to this on the Ukrainian side to ensure that aid flows and efforts reflect the government's priorities and its vision for reconstruction. So in a sense, what I hope we can see, and we're talking to them, and I hope the OECD can help them with the work of our DCD and colleagues from other directorates, is to create structures that will both address the donor concerns about transparency and integrity, but also ensure a high degree of Ukrainian leadership and ownership.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bill. Here's a question. Here is a question from Dennis Lam, who is the former U.S. ambassador to the OECD. He is asking about the processes. What process is envisaged to provide security support, which will be critical to encouraging private investment in post-war Ukraine? Is that something that you have been analyzing? Yuri, you have been too silent.
Well, I will say, thank you. I will say very briefly, I'm not a military expert. I don't know what it takes to make sure that Russia will never ever gain Ukraine. But in economic terms, it's clear that you need to de-risk investment, and we have various tools to achieve this. For example, we can provide subsidized insurance or have subsidized import-export loans, or allow firms to partner with governments so that governments can take certain equity in the investments made by these private companies. We know EBRD has been operating in this environment for many, many years. We can rely on their expertise and experience to make things happen. So we have lots and lots of options there in terms of economics. I'm not sure what we can do militarily.
Before we conclude, we have 2 minutes left according to the time allocated. I would like to, if there's anything that our speakers would like to say in closing, if there is a point. I saw, Natalia, that you had your hand raised, but I didn't see it soon enough. But if there's anything that you would like to add before we sum up, the floor is yours. Not to put you on the spot.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there was a brilliant question about governance and corruption and oligarchs. And I think, building new structures is not enough. It's important to have procedures and processes that are very familiar to donors. And therefore, the idea that I think all of us mentioned of having EU membership aligned or going hand in hand with these funds is crucial, because as Thornberg mentioned, Ukraine has very transparent procurement system. We publish contracts. EU countries do not publish contracts with the suppliers, but still, even though we have everything like on the spot, there is a huge mistrust to what's going on in procurement. And I think having something that is very familiar and which is already going on, like EU procedures for like using some structural fund or cohesion funds, would really create more transparency and trust. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I don't see any other hands raised. Just to sort of try to the impossible task of trying to sum up what we have heard here today. And like I said, for me personally, this has been extremely interesting and relevant. We heard that from Yuri that the story of Ukraine prior to the war was one of diversity, of progress, of integration, and the story of the past 3 months has been about other very important characteristics of resilience, courage, and again, resilience. It is amazing to hear the descriptions that have been, or the interventions that have been set here, performed here today. And it was modestly said that this resilience is born from luck and preparedness. There's much we can learn from Ukraine on preparedness, obviously. How its financial sector learned from the global financial crisis and the invasion of 2014, how Ukraine innovated during COVID. We heard from Torbjörn Becker how Ukraine can benefit from the expertise that we have here at the OECD and in the other international financial institutions. But as His Excellency the Ambassador said at the start, there's also so much that we can learn from Ukraine, and learning from each other. Mutual learning is the best way to do it. I would propose. I was struck by what Timothy said about the power of local communities and civil society, and what has been repeated as well. This is especially striking, given Ukraine's increasing integration into the global economy. As we've seen in many countries, this is not always an easy balance to strike. We have also heard how the recovery and reconstruction, that it must start now. And with a reconstruction plan that is envisaged, articulated and owned by Ukrainians. We are all ready, willing, and able to help, but this is an important factor that is also we should keep in mind. And for that, for those institutions, households, and businesses who have somehow carried on as usual, that they must be supported to keep doing so. That was an important point that was made. Lastly, we can't forget how so much of the world's future hinges on what happens in Ukraine. It's been mentioned a number of times that a global famine looms on the horizon. I just came back this morning from Dakar, from a meeting of UN UNECA, the Economic Council of Africa, and this is what was the topic highest on the agenda there, the looming famine. And moreover, what is also on the line are the very values on which our civilization depends on. They're under threat, and so Ukraine's fight is the humanity's fight. So this is obviously not a complete takeaway of the discussion. It was much more fruitful than can be summed up in a couple of minutes. But the most important thing is to, of course, end the conflict, and hopefully we can start doing exactly what we've been discussing, what needs to be done very soon, that we can start building and reconstructing Ukraine. Just in very closing, today is May 17th, and we here at the Development Centre, we value that day as 61 years ago today, John F. Kennedy, former President John F. Kennedy, then Senator, made a speech in the Parliament of Canada in Ottawa, where he made the suggestion that the countries of the OECD should form a forum of discussion, create a center for development, where policy exchange and peer learning on equal footing on development and development policies should be created. And now, 61 years later, since that speech was made, we are here at the Development Centre discussing this relevant topic on equal footing among all of our members and participants here today. I know that over 300 people logged in, and I want to thank each and every one of you. I would like to propose that we do this again, and so I'm already requesting time from the distinguished panelists again. We have to continue this discussion, and we here at the OECD and at the OECD Development Centre, we are of course ready, willing, and able to do our part as much as possible, as much as we can. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, our distinguished speakers, ambassadors, guests, colleagues. I hope you have a good day. I know that I have been very inspired, and this is going to take me, I'm going to take it with me out to finish my day. Thanks, everyone.